They thought I would sign my house over to my son. But my lawyer had already changed the game. My name is Margaret Ellis, and at 68 years old, I learned a painful truth. Sometimes strangers will protect your dignity before your own family ever will. For 43 years, my husband Daniel and I built our home brick by brick. We bought the old 2-story house when we were barely able to afford it. The roof leaked every spring, the floors creaked with every step, and the backyard was nothing more than dry dirt. But to us, it was paradise. Daniel worked double shifts as a mechanic. I worked as a school librarian. Every extra dollar went into fixing the house. We painted every wall ourselves. We planted every tree. We celebrated birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, and anniversaries under that roof. That house wasn't just property. It was our life story. When Daniel passed away after a long battle with cancer, the silence inside those walls became unbearable. The only thing keeping me going was my son, Ryan. At least, that's what I believed. Ryan wasn't always selfish. As a little boy, he used to run into my arms after school and tell me every little thing that happened during his day. He promised me countless times, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll always take care of you." I believed every word. Parents always do. But promises made by children don't always survive adulthood, especially when money enters the picture. Ryan married Vanessa 5 years after Daniel died. She was elegant, fashionable, and charming. At least in public. The first time we met, she hugged me tightly. "I'm so lucky to have you as my mother-in-law." I smiled. I've always wanted a daughter. Looking back, I think she smiled because she had already started calculating what my house was worth. Little by little, everything changed. Ryan stopped calling every Sunday. Birthdays became text messages. Holidays became optional. Whenever they visited, they weren't interested in spending time together. Instead, Vanessa would casually ask questions. "So, have you updated your will? Is the mortgage completely paid off? Have you thought about downsizing?" At first, I thought she was simply making conversation. Then the questions became more direct. "You don't really need a house this big. It must be difficult maintaining everything alone. Think how much easier life would be if Ryan owned it." Owned it, not lived in it with me. Owned it. Every conversation somehow returned to the house. One Sunday afternoon, Ryan finally sat across from me at the kitchen table. He cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk." Those words never bring good news. Vanessa slid a stack of papers toward me. "We've spoken with someone who can help." I looked down. "Property transfer agreement." I frowned. "What is this?" Ryan forced a smile. "It's just paperwork." "No, Ryan, it lets us manage the property." "I already manage it. It'll make everything easier." "For who?" Neither of them answered. Vanessa leaned forward. "We're thinking about your future." I quietly folded the papers. "My future still belongs to me." Her smile disappeared. After that day, something changed completely. Their visits became frequent. Too frequent. They brought groceries, offered to clean, insisted on helping. To anyone else, it would have looked like loving children caring for an aging mother. But I noticed something. Every act of kindness came with another conversation about signing the house over. Every single time. One afternoon I overheard Vanessa talking on the phone in my garden. She didn't know I was watering the roses nearby. "It's basically done," she whispered. "The old lady is getting softer. We'll have the deed before Christmas." I froze. Old lady. Not Mom. Not Margaret. Just the old lady. I quietly walked back inside before she saw me. That night I cried harder than I had since Daniel's funeral. Not because of the house. Because I realized my own family no longer saw me as family. I was simply standing between them and real estate. A week later Ryan invited everyone to dinner. My sister Helen came. My nephew Mark. 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years. The atmosphere felt strange. Too cheerful. Halfway through dessert Ryan stood up. He tapped his glass. "I'd like to make an announcement." Everyone applauded. Vanessa smiled proudly. Ryan looked at me. "Mom has decided it's finally time to let the next generation take responsibility." I blinked. "What?" He continued anyway. "She's transferring the house to us." The room erupted in applause. I hadn't said a single word. Helen hugged me. "I'm proud of you." Mark grinned. "It's the smart decision." I looked around the room. No one had even asked whether I wanted this. They simply assumed. Ryan placed a pen in front of me. "Go ahead, Mom." The room became silent. I pushed the papers back toward him. "I'm not signing anything tonight." The smiles disappeared. Driving home later, Ryan called me. You embarrassed me. I embarrassed you. In front of everyone. You announced something I never agreed to. You were going to sign eventually. I never said that. You don't need the house. I live there. You could move into assisted living. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I'm perfectly healthy. You won't always be. Those 6 words echoed in my head long after the call ended. The next morning I made a decision. For the first time in years. I called an attorney. Not because I planned to disinherit my son. Because I wanted someone to explain exactly what I was being pressured into. When I arrived at the law office, Attorney Michael Carter welcomed me warmly. He listened without interrupting. I showed him every document Ryan had asked me to sign. He read quietly, then looked up. Mrs. Ellis. His expression had changed. Did anyone explain these documents to you? No, he sighed. If you had signed these, your son would have become the legal owner almost immediately. I felt cold. What would happen to me? You could continue living there only as long as the new owner allowed. I stared at him. They could force me to leave. He nodded slowly. Legally, yes. Tears filled my eyes. My own son. Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. That afternoon, instead of going home, I sat alone in the park. Children laughed nearby. Birds flew overhead. The world continued as though nothing had happened. Meanwhile, everything inside me had changed. Daniel had spent his final days worrying only about one thing. Promise me Ryan will always have a home. I had promised. But Daniel never imagined Ryan would try to take mine first. Over the next month, the pressure intensified. Ryan called almost every day. Have you signed? Vanessa texted reminders. My relatives began taking sides. Helen said, why are you being stubborn? Mark laughed. You can't take the house with you. Another cousin actually said, old people should know when to let go. Old people, again, not mothers, not sisters, not family, just obstacles. Finally, Michael Carter called. I have an idea. What kind of idea? A completely legal one. He smiled. If your family wants to play games with paperwork. He closed the file. Then let's make sure they're playing a game they can't win. For the first time in weeks. I smiled too. Because they thought I was weak. They thought I would quietly sign away everything Daniel and I had built. They had absolutely no idea. My lawyer had already changed the game. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Not because my problems had disappeared. Because I finally knew I wasn't facing them alone. Attorney Michael Carter had seen situations like mine before. People think greed always looks loud, he told me. Most of the time, it arrives wearing a smile. His words stayed with me. The next morning Ryan called. So, have you thought about the paperwork? I answered calmly, yes. There was a long silence. Finally, he smiled through the phone. I knew you'd come around. I didn't say I was signing today. But you're going to. I looked at Daniel's framed photograph sitting on the mantle. I'll let you know. Ryan sounded relieved. Good. Vanessa will be happy. Not I will be happy. Vanessa. That told me everything. Later that week, Michael invited me back to his office. He placed several folders on the desk. I've reviewed every document your son gave you. And they're written entirely in his favor. I wasn't surprised anymore. If you signed those papers, he continued, you would no longer control your own home. What do we do? Michael leaned back. We prepare our own documents. Our own. He nodded. If Ryan truly wants to protect you, he'll have no problem signing them. What if he refuses? Michael smiled. Then we'll know exactly why he's here. The following Sunday Ryan and Vanessa arrived carrying flowers, pastries, and smiles so wide they almost looked rehearsed. Vanessa hugged me. You look wonderful. Ryan set the pastries on the table. We thought we'd spend the afternoon together. Everything felt strangely perfect. Too perfect. Halfway through lunch, Vanessa casually asked, so, have you talked to a lawyer? Yes. Their smiles froze. Ryan recovered first. Great. Then everything should move quickly. I've prepared some paperwork. Vanessa clapped her hands. Wonderful. She thought I meant their paperwork. I didn't correct her. That evening my sister Helen called. I heard you're finally signing. Who told you that? Ryan. I smiled quietly. So he's already celebrating. Helen laughed. He deserves it. After all, he'll inherit the house someday anyway. Someday. Exactly. So why is everyone in such a hurry? Helen had no answer. She changed the subject. Over the next few days, something interesting happened. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly became incredibly kind. One cousin brought homemade soup. Another offered to mow the lawn. Mark even volunteered to fix my fence. Not one of them had visited after Daniel's funeral. Now they couldn't stay away. It wasn't love, it was investment. Everyone believed Ryan was about to become the new owner. They wanted to stay close to the future king. Michael called Thursday afternoon. Everything is ready. I drove to his office. He slid a neat folder across the table. This document protects you completely. I opened it carefully. It looked nothing like Ryan's paperwork. This says I keep full ownership. Correct. And if I become unable to manage the house, you choose an independent trustee, not your son. I nodded. And this? Michael smiled. That's the important part. I read slowly. If any beneficiary attempted to pressure, deceive, or manipulate the owner into transferring the property prematurely, that beneficiary would lose all claim to the house. I looked up. Is this legal? Completely. And enforceable? Absolutely. I couldn't help smiling. So if Ryan keeps trying to force me, he may be disqualifying himself. For the first time in months, I felt powerful. 3 days later Ryan called again. Mom, everyone's free Saturday. For what? The signing. I don't remember agreeing. We already told the family. Of course they had. They were so certain of victory that they'd announced it before the game had even started. I answered, quietly. Fine. Ryan nearly shouted with excitement. I knew you'd do the right thing. Saturday arrived. The dining room filled with relatives. Helen, Mark, 2 cousins, Vanessa's parents, even neighbors I'd barely spoken to. It felt less like a family gathering, and more like an awards ceremony. Everyone expected Ryan to receive the prize. The house, Vanessa whispered loudly enough for me to hear. By tonight everything will finally belong to us. I pretended not to notice. A black car pulled into the driveway. Attorney Michael Carter stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. The room immediately became quiet. Ryan greeted him confidently. Thanks for coming. Michael smiled politely. My client requested that I personally oversee today's signing. My client. Ryan didn't seem to notice those words. He assumed the lawyer was there for him. Everyone gathered around the dining table. Ryan placed his original paperwork beside Michael's folder. We'll just sign these. Michael gently pushed Ryan's papers aside. No. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? We'll be using the documents prepared for Mrs. Ellis. Vanessa's smile faded. What documents? The legally reviewed ones. Ryan looked confused. I've never seen those. Michael answered calmly. That's correct. One by one, he explained every page. Margaret Ellis remained the sole legal owner. No immediate transfer. No change of title. No forced sale. No loss of occupancy. Everything Daniel and Margaret had built remained entirely under her control. Ryan interrupted. This isn't what we discussed. Michael looked at him. My client discussed nothing with you. The room became silent. Vanessa crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. Michael ignored her. He continued reading. Then he reached the final clause. If any heir attempts coercion, intimidation, manipulation, or deceptive pressure regarding ownership of this property. Ryan shifted uneasily. That individual may legally forfeit any inheritance rights related to this estate. Silence. Complete silence. Every face around the table changed. Ryan stared at me. What is this? I answered calmly. Protection. You don't trust me. I held his gaze. Should I? Vanessa stood up so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over. This is insulting. Michael closed the folder. No one is required to sign. Ryan looked around the room. His confident smile had disappeared. For the first time, he realized he wasn't controlling the meeting. He wasn't controlling me, and he definitely wasn't controlling my lawyer. The game had changed, exactly as Michael promised, but none of them yet realized. The biggest surprise wasn't even inside the paperwork. It was hidden somewhere they would never think to look. And when that truth came out, the entire family would turn against each other. The silence after attorney Michael Carter finished reading the documents was unlike anything I had ever experienced. A few minutes earlier, everyone had been smiling, laughing, and congratulating Ryan. Now no one spoke. Ryan looked from me to Michael. There has to be some mistake. Michael calmly closed the folder. There isn't. Vanessa's face turned red. So you're choosing a lawyer over your own family? I looked directly at her. No, I'm choosing honesty. Her expression hardened. You've changed. I nodded. Yes. I finally opened my eyes. Ryan stood up. So that's it. You don't trust your own son? I answered quietly. Trust isn't something parents owe their children forever. Everyone stared at me. It's something children continue to earn. No one had anything to say. Just then Michael reached into his briefcase again. I believe there's one more matter we should discuss. Ryan frowned. What now? Michael placed a small digital recorder on the table. I asked Mrs. Ellis if she had saved any messages. Ryan looked confused. What messages? Michael pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the room. The old lady is getting softer. The room froze. We'll have the deed before Christmas. No one moved. Helen slowly looked toward Vanessa. Mark lowered his eyes. Vanessa's face turned pale. She whispered, "That's taken out of context." Michael didn't respond. Instead, he played another recording. Ryan's voice echoed through the room. "She doesn't need that house anymore. Once it's ours, we'll renovate it and sell it. Sell it, not preserve it, not live in it. Sell it." I felt tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. Daniel had built that house with his own hands. To Ryan, it had become a business deal. Vanessa slammed her hand on the table. "This is spying." Michael replied calmly, "No. These were messages voluntarily provided by my client and conversations legally preserved under applicable law." Ryan looked at me. "You recorded us." "I started after I realized you weren't speaking to me as your mother anymore." The room was silent again. Then someone unexpected spoke. It was my sister Helen. "Ryan." He looked at her hopefully. She shook her head. "Is it true?" Ryan hesitated. "Things sound different when they're recorded." Helen frowned. "That's not what I asked." Before Ryan could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Everyone turned. "I wasn't expecting anyone." Michael smiled. "I believe that's our final guest." He walked to the door and welcomed an elderly gentleman inside. His name was George Bennett. George had lived next door to Daniel and me for over 30 years. He had watched Ryan grow up. Ryan looked confused. "Why is Mr. Bennett here?" George slowly removed his cap. "Because I have something to say." George looked around the room before speaking. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone." He looked directly at Ryan. "But your father was my best friend." My heart tightened. George continued. 3 months before Daniel died, he visited me." Ryan stared in disbelief. He was worried. "Worried about what?" George sighed. "He was afraid someone would one day value this house more than the family inside it." The room fell completely silent. George reached into his coat pocket. "I've kept this for years." He handed Michael a sealed envelope. Michael gave it to me. Written across the front were 4 familiar words. "For Margaret only." My hands trembled. It was Daniel's handwriting. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. I could barely breathe as I began reading aloud. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer beside you." Several relatives lowered their heads. "This house was never built to make anyone rich. It was built to keep the people we love together. If anyone ever pressures you to give it away before you're ready." I stopped reading for a moment. My eyes filled with tears. Michael gently nodded. I continued. "Don't reward greed. Protect yourself. The right people will never ask you to prove your love with a signature." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Except for Vanessa. She stared at the floor. Ryan slowly sank back into his chair. He looked broken. When did Dad write this?" George answered. "The week before he passed away. He asked me to keep it safe until Margaret truly needed it." Ryan covered his face with both hands. Vanessa suddenly stood. "This changes nothing." Everyone looked at her. "The house is still worth a fortune." The words escaped before she could stop them. The room erupted. Helen gasped. Mark stared at her. Even Vanessa's own parents looked horrified. Her father quietly asked, "Is that what this has always been about?" She realized too late what she had admitted. Ryan looked at his wife in complete disbelief. "You told me we wanted the house because Mom needed help." Vanessa remained silent. Ryan's voice shook. "You said we'd keep it." Still nothing. Finally she whispered, "I thought selling it would solve our financial problems." Ryan froze. "What financial problems?" She closed her eyes. "I never told you." The room held its breath. "I've been hiding debts." Ryan stared at her. "What debts?" "Credit cards." "How much?" She whispered the number. "Nearly $420,000. The room exploded with shocked voices. Ryan looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. He had spent months pressuring his own mother, without ever knowing the real reason. I watched my son carefully. For the first time that day, he wasn't angry. He wasn't demanding. He looked devastated. Not because he had lost the house. Because he had finally understood how deeply he had been manipulated, and how much he had hurt me in the process. But despite the truth finally coming out, one final legal surprise remained. Attorney Michael Carter quietly opened one last sealed envelope. He looked around the room and said, "Before anyone leaves, there's one final document that Mrs. Ellis has asked me to read. The room fell silent once more. No one knew that what was inside that envelope would change the future of the Ellis family forever. No one moved. Attorney Michael Carter held the final sealed envelope in his hands while the room remained completely silent. Just minutes earlier, hidden recordings, Daniel's heartfelt letter, and Vanessa's confession had shattered every assumption in the room. Now everyone waited to learn what could possibly come next. Michael looked at me. Mrs. Ellis, would you like me to read this? I took a deep breath and nodded. Please. He carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the document. This is Mrs. Margaret Ellis's updated estate plan. Ryan slowly lifted his head. His face no longer carried confidence. It carried regret. Michael began reading. Margaret Ellis remains the sole owner of her home and all associated property. No one reacted. Everyone already knew that. He continued. Upon her passing, the property will not be sold immediately. Vanessa lowered her eyes. The home will instead be placed into the Daniel Ellis Family Trust for a period of 10 years. Several relatives exchanged surprised looks. Michael explained further. During those 10 years, the property must remain intact. It cannot be sold, mortgaged, or divided. The room was silent again. Then came the next clause. If any beneficiary attempts to challenge this trust through intimidation, fraud, or unnecessary litigation, that beneficiary's share will be donated to a children's literacy foundation. Helen quietly smiled. Daniel had always believed education changed lives. Michael continued reading. The home may only pass to Ryan Ellis if he demonstrates, over time, that he values family above financial gain. Ryan looked stunned. What does that mean? Michael answered calmly. It means ownership is no longer automatic. It must be earned. No one argued. Then Michael reached the final page. Mrs. Ellis has also established a scholarship in Daniel Ellis's memory for students who cannot afford college. I smiled through tears. Daniel had always dreamed of helping young people. Now, part of everything we built together would help generations we would never meet. That felt right. The meeting ended quietly. No one applauded. No one celebrated. The relatives who had confidently expected a property transfer left one by one without saying much. Their excitement had disappeared. Only Ryan remained. Vanessa had already walked outside. She didn't wait for him. Ryan slowly approached me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked into the eyes of the little boy who had once promised to protect me. I know. Tears rolled down his face. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I won't. He nodded. I understand. But, he looked up. That doesn't mean forgiveness is impossible. Over the next several months, something changed. Ryan stopped asking about the house. Instead, he started asking about me. He called every Sunday, not to discuss paperwork, just to talk. Sometimes we drank tea together on the porch. Sometimes we worked in Daniel's old garden. There were awkward silences. Pain doesn't disappear overnight, but little by little, trust began growing again. Vanessa moved into a small apartment while she worked to deal with her debts. She later wrote me a handwritten letter. She admitted that fear, pride, and poor financial decisions had led her down the wrong path. She didn't ask for the house. She didn't ask for money. She simply apologized. Whether I completely forgave her wasn't important. What mattered was that she finally accepted responsibility. One spring afternoon, Ryan brought his young daughter, Lily, to visit. She ran through the backyard exactly as Ryan had done decades earlier. She laughed beneath the old maple tree Daniel planted the year Ryan was born. She looked at me with bright eyes. "Grandma, did Grandpa really build this house?" I smiled. With his own hands. She gently touched one of the wooden porch posts. "Then we should take good care of it." I felt tears in my eyes. Children often understand what adults forget. A home is more than walls. It's memories. It's sacrifice. It's love. Months later, Michael Carter stopped by for coffee. He looked around the living room. "It feels different here." "It is. You know," he said, "many people think winning means someone else loses." I smiled. "What do you think?" "I think the best legal victory is the one that gives people a chance to become better." I looked out the window. Ryan and Lily were planting flowers together. For the first time in years, they weren't talking about property. They were making memories. That evening, I sat alone on the front porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. I held Daniel's old photograph in my hands. "We did it," I whispered. "We protected our home." A gentle breeze moved through the garden. For a moment, it almost felt as though Daniel were sitting beside me again. Not speaking, just smiling. People in town eventually heard the story. Some believed it was about inheritance. Others thought it was about legal strategy. They were all wrong. The story had never truly been about a house. It was about a mother who refused to mistake pressure for love. It was about honoring a lifetime of sacrifice. It was about remembering that respect cannot be demanded with signatures, and love cannot be measured by property. The greatest surprise wasn't that my lawyer changed the game. It was that changing the game gave my family one last chance to change themselves. And that, more than any house or inheritance, became the greatest legacy Daniel and I ever left behind. 3 months passed after the family meeting. For the first time in years, my house felt like a home again. The constant phone calls had stopped. No one asked about signatures. No one mentioned property values. Instead, there was peace. Every morning, I watered Daniel's roses, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on the front porch watching the neighborhood wake up. One Saturday morning, I heard a familiar engine pull into the driveway. Ryan. He stepped out of his truck alone. No expensive gifts, no legal documents, no forced smile, just a toolbox in one hand. He walked slowly toward the porch. Morning, Mom, morning. He looked up at the roof. I noticed a few shingles are loose. I smiled faintly. They are. I thought, maybe I could fix them. You don't have to. I know. He hesitated. I want to. For the next 6 hours, Ryan worked quietly. He repaired the roof, cleaned the gutters, fixed the back gate, and even repainted the old mailbox Daniel had built years ago. Not once did he mention the house. Not once did he ask about the trust. That evening, as we sat together on the porch, he finally spoke. I spent so much time thinking about owning this place. He looked around the yard. That I forgot what made it valuable in the first place. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. A week later, attorney Michael Carter called. Mrs. Ellis, I have something you should know. What is it? Someone has contacted my office asking if the trust can be challenged. My heart sank. Who? Michael paused. It wasn't Ryan. I frowned. Then who? Your nephew, Mark. I closed my eyes. Even after everything that had happened, greed hadn't completely disappeared. Michael continued, don't worry. The trust is solid. He has no legal grounds. Still, I couldn't help feeling disappointed. Some people never learn. That Sunday, the entire family gathered for Daniel's birthday remembrance. This time, no one talked about money. Instead, Lily placed fresh flowers beside Daniel's photograph. She looked at everyone and asked, can Grandpa hear us? Ryan smiled sadly. I think he can. Lily nodded. Then let's make him proud. The room fell silent. Even Mark lowered his head. For the first time in years, our family wasn't arguing. We were remembering the man who had brought us together in the first place. As the evening ended, Ryan walked beside me to the front door. Mom, yes, I know I can't erase what I did. You can't, but I hope one day, you'll trust me again. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Trust isn't rebuilt with promises. He nodded. I know, it's rebuilt with time. Ryan smiled for the first time that day. Then I'll be patient. As he drove away, I looked up at the old maple tree Daniel had planted decades earlier. Its roots had survived storms, droughts, and harsh winters. Families are much the same. Some branches break, some leaves fall, but if the roots are strong enough, healing is still possible. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed ours just might. 6 months passed. Life settled into a peaceful routine that I hadn't experienced since Daniel was alive. Ryan kept his promise. Every Saturday morning, he arrived with a toolbox instead of legal papers. Sometimes he repaired a fence. Sometimes he cut the grass. Sometimes we simply sat on the porch drinking coffee while remembering Daniel. He never mentioned the trust. He never asked about the inheritance. Slowly, very slowly, the son I thought I had lost began finding his way home again. One rainy afternoon, I decided to clean the attic. It had been years since anyone had gone up there. Dust covered everything. Old toys, Christmas decorations, boxes filled with photographs. Then I found something unusual. An old wooden chest with Daniel's initials carved into the lid. Inside were dozens of letters, receipts, and a worn leather journal. Curious, I opened it. The first page read, if Margaret ever finds this, she'll finally know why I protected this house so fiercely. My heart skipped a beat. I sat on the attic floor and began reading. Daniel had written about the early years of our marriage, the struggles of paying the mortgage, and the sacrifices we made. Then one entry caught my attention. Today I received an offer from a developer to buy our land. They offered more money than I had ever seen. I refused. A home is worth more than a fortune when it holds your family's memories. Tears filled my eyes. He had never told me about that offer. The next morning, I invited Ryan over. When he arrived, I handed him the journal. He spent nearly an hour reading it. By the time he reached the final page, tears were rolling down his face. I never knew Dad turned down all that money. You were too young. Ryan closed the journal. I finally understand. What? He wasn't protecting a building. I smiled. He was protecting a promise. Ryan nodded. And I almost destroyed it. A few days later, attorney Michael Carter called again. I've received another inquiry. I sighed. Mark again? No. Who? A real estate development company. They want to purchase your property. I've already said no. Michael hesitated. They're offering nearly $4 million. I laughed softly. They clearly don't know me. I told them that. That weekend, an expensive black SUV stopped outside my house. A sharply dressed businessman stepped out. Mrs. Ellis. Yes. My name is Richard Collins. He handed me his card. Our company is developing this entire neighborhood. I'm not selling. We're prepared to increase the offer. I'm still not selling. He smiled politely. Everyone has a price. I looked at the old porch Daniel had built with his own hands. Then I looked back at him. No, Mrs. Ellis. My husband already answered that question 20 years ago. The man looked confused. My answer is exactly the same. He quietly returned to his SUV and drove away. From inside the living room, Ryan had watched the entire conversation. When I came back inside, he simply smiled. I'm proud of you, Mom. I smiled back. I'm proud of you too. For what? You didn't ask how much they offered. Ryan laughed. A year ago, I probably would have. That evening, Lily was drawing pictures at the kitchen table. She held up one of her drawings. It showed our old house surrounded by flowers, with 3 people standing on the porch. Who's that? I asked. She pointed. That's Grandpa. But Grandpa isn't here. She smiled innocently. He is in this house. Ryan looked at me. Neither of us said a word. Sometimes children understand things adults spend years trying to learn. Our home wasn't valuable because of the land beneath it. It was valuable because love had been built into every wall. And for the first time in many years, our family was finally learning that lesson together. Nearly a year had passed since the day my family gathered around my dining room table expecting me to sign away my home. Looking back, it felt like a different lifetime. The tension that once filled every room had slowly been replaced by something I thought was gone forever: peace. Ryan had changed in ways I never imagined. He no longer came to the house because he wanted something. He came because he wanted to be there. Every Saturday morning, he arrived with coffee in one hand and a smile on his face. Sometimes we worked in Daniel's garden. Sometimes we sat quietly on the porch. Those silent afternoons healed more than 1,000 apologies ever could. One afternoon Ryan parked his truck in the driveway carrying a small cardboard box. Mom, he said nervously, I found these while cleaning my garage. Inside were dozens of old family photographs. Pictures from birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings. There was even one of Daniel teaching 6-year-old Ryan how to hammer a nail into a wooden fence. Ryan stared at the picture for a long time. I forgot this day. I smiled. Your father didn't. As we looked through the photographs, Ryan suddenly stopped. There was a faded picture of Daniel standing proudly beside the house the day we finished paying off the mortgage. Written on the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were simple words. A home belongs to the people who protect it, not the people who simply inherit it. Ryan quietly wiped away a tear. I wish I had remembered that sooner. A few weeks later, attorney Michael Carter called with unexpected news. Mrs. Ellis, he said, I thought you'd like to know something. What is it? The developer has officially withdrawn every offer. I smiled. I suppose they finally realized I wasn't interested. Michael laughed. They said convincing you would be harder than buying the entire neighborhood. For the first time in a long while, we both laughed. As summer arrived, Lily had an idea. Grandma, she said excitedly, let's have a family picnic in Grandpa's garden. Everyone agreed, even Helen, even Mark. When the day came, the backyard was filled with laughter instead of arguments. Children ran across the grass. The barbecue smoked in the corner. Daniel's old radio played softly on the porch. At one point, Ryan stood up holding a glass of lemonade. I want to say something. The yard became quiet. A year ago, I almost lost the most important person in my life because I cared more about what she owned than about who she was. He looked at me. Mom, thank you for refusing to give up on me, even when I gave up on myself. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. I walked over and hugged him. For the first time since Daniel's death. It felt like our family was whole again. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in the backyard. The sun was setting behind the old maple tree. I looked around the garden Daniel and I had planted decades earlier. Every flower, every stone, every tree held a memory. I whispered softly, "We kept our promise." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Some people might have called it coincidence. I preferred to believe Daniel was smiling. Little did I know, one final surprise was waiting for our family, one that would ensure Daniel's legacy would live on for generations. Autumn arrived quietly. The maple tree in the front yard turned brilliant shades of red and gold, just as it had every year since Daniel planted it. One Saturday morning, Ryan knocked on my door earlier than usual. "Mom," he said with a smile, "there's somewhere I'd like to take you." Curious, I climbed into his truck. About 20 minutes later, we stopped in front of the old elementary school where I had worked as a librarian for nearly 30 years. I looked at him, confused. "What are we doing here?" Ryan smiled. "Come inside." The school principal greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, "we've been waiting for you." I walked into the library and stopped in my tracks. Above the entrance hung a brand new wooden sign. The Daniel and Margaret Ellis Reading Room. I covered my mouth with both hands. What is this?" Ryan stepped beside me. "It's the first project funded by Dad's Scholarship Trust." Children were already sitting on colorful rugs, reading books together. New shelves lined the walls. Every book carried a small label. "Gifted in memory of Daniel Ellis, a man who believed every child deserved a chance to dream." Tears rolled down my face. Daniel had never cared about being remembered. He only cared about helping people. Now, years after his passing, he still was. A few weeks later, the town council invited our family to a community celebration. Neighbors, teachers, former students, and friends filled the local hall. The mayor spoke first. "Some inherit wealth." He paused. "Others create a legacy." He smiled toward me. "The Ellis family has reminded this community that the greatest inheritance isn't property, it's character." The audience applauded. I looked toward Ryan. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at me. Proudly. After the ceremony, Ryan handed me a small wrapped package. "I've been working on this for months." Inside was a beautifully restored wooden toolbox. It was Daniel's old toolbox, the one he had carried for decades before it had fallen into disrepair. Ryan had sanded every surface, replaced the broken handle, polished the brass hinges, and carved new words into the lid. I traced the letters with my fingertips. "Built with love, protected with honor." I couldn't speak. Ryan finally said the words he had carried inside for over a year. "I used to think Dad left me a house." He shook his head, "but he actually left me a lesson." That winter, snow covered the roof of our old home. Inside, the fireplace crackled just as it always had. Lily sat beside me, reading one of the new books from the reading room. She looked up and asked, "Grandma, when I grow up, will this still be our family home?" I smiled. "I hope so." She thought for a moment. "I'll take care of it." Ryan looked at her and smiled. "So will I." For the first time, I believed him without hesitation. Years passed. The Daniel Ellis Family Trust continued helping students attend college. The reading room became one of the town's favorite places. Children who had never met Daniel spoke his name with gratitude. Our home remained exactly where it had always been. Not because it couldn't be sold, but because no one wanted to sell it anymore. It had become something far more valuable than real estate. It had become a symbol of everything our family had nearly lost, and finally found again. On my 85th birthday, 4 generations of our family gathered beneath the old maple tree. The grandchildren laughed in the yard. The adults shared stories on the porch. Ryan walked over and sat beside me. "Mom, yes, thank you." "For what?" "For refusing to sign those papers." I smiled gently. "If I had signed them." He nodded. "We might have lost more than a house." We sat together in comfortable silence. Sometimes the greatest conversations need no words. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through each room of the house one last time before bed. The kitchen where Daniel and I danced while dinner burned. The staircase Ryan raced up as a little boy. The porch where Lily learned to ride her first bicycle. Every room whispered memories. I paused in front of Daniel's photograph. His familiar smile looked back at me. Softly, I said, "They thought they were fighting over a house." I smiled through tears, but they never realized. The greatest thing we owned was never the house. It was the family we still had time to save. I turned off the lights and closed the front door. Outside, the porch light continued shining into the night, just as it had for decades. A quiet reminder that a true home is never measured by its price. It is measured by the love that refuses to give it away. 5 years passed more quickly than I ever imagined. The seasons continued to change, but one thing remained the same. Every evening, as the porch light came on, someone in the family was usually sitting outside. Sometimes it was Ryan, sometimes Lily, sometimes it was me. The house no longer felt like something people wanted to own. It felt like the place everyone wanted to return to. That alone told me how much our family had changed. Ryan had become a different man. He volunteered at the reading room every Saturday morning, helping children repair old books and build simple wooden shelves. Whenever anyone thanked him, he always gave the same answer: "I'm only continuing what my parents started." He never mentioned the inheritance. He never mentioned the trust. Instead, he spoke about responsibility. People who had once heard rumors about our family's arguments now knew us for something entirely different. They knew us as the family that helped others. One afternoon, Michael Carter came to visit. His hair had turned almost completely gray, but his warm smile hadn't changed. We sat together on the porch with cups of tea. "You know," he said, looking across the garden, "I've handled hundreds of inheritance cases." "I'm sure you have. Most of them end with families speaking through lawyers for the rest of their lives." He paused. "Yours is one of the few that ended with the family speaking to each other again." I smiled. "That wasn't because of the law. No, it was because someone finally chose truth over pride." Michael nodded. "And because someone refused to surrender to pressure." Later that summer, Lily graduated from high school. She had earned excellent grades and dreamed of becoming a teacher. When she received a scholarship from the Daniel Ellis Family Trust, she looked surprised. "But Grandpa created this." Ryan smiled. "He wanted to help students." Lily shook her head. "Then I don't want special treatment." Michael, who was also present at the ceremony, explained gently. "You aren't receiving this because you're family. You're receiving it because an independent committee chose you based on your work." Lily accepted the scholarship with tears in her eyes. "I'll make Grandpa proud," I quietly whispered. "I know you will." That autumn, our town celebrated the 10th anniversary of the reading room. Hundreds of former students returned. Some had become doctors, some were engineers, others were teachers, nurses, firefighters, and business owners. One by one, they shared stories about how a simple scholarship or a free library had changed their lives. Listening to them, I realized something. Daniel had never become famous. His name had never appeared on television. He had never been wealthy. Yet his kindness had reached people he would never meet. That was a far greater success than any amount of money. As the evening celebration ended, Ryan asked everyone for a moment of silence. He stood beside the old photograph of Daniel displayed near the entrance. "There was a time," he began, "when I believed this house was my inheritance." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong." He looked toward me. "My inheritance was my father's character, and my mother's courage." The room erupted in applause. I felt my eyes fill with tears. Not because people were clapping, but because my son finally understood the lesson his father had hoped he would learn. Years later, when I was no longer able to care for the large garden by myself, Ryan and Lily came every weekend to help. No one asked whose house it was. No one discussed property values. Instead, they argued about where to plant roses, which vegetables to grow, and how Daniel would have done things. Those were the kinds of conversations I had missed for so many years. One quiet evening, I found Lily sitting alone on the porch. She looked thoughtful. "Grandma." "Yes. Do you ever regret not signing those papers?" I smiled softly. "No, not even a little." I looked at the old maple tree swaying gently in the breeze. "If I had signed those papers, I might have kept everyone happy for a day." I paused. "But by refusing, I gave our family a chance to become better for a lifetime." Lily nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." On my 90th birthday, our family gathered once again beneath the maple tree. Children laughed across the yard. Grandchildren chased each other through the garden. The porch was decorated with photographs from every decade of our lives. Ryan handed me a framed picture. It showed Daniel and me standing in front of the house on the day we bought it. Across the bottom, in elegant lettering, were the words, "A house can be inherited. A legacy must be earned." I held the frame close to my heart. That single sentence captured everything our journey had taught us. As the sun set, I looked around at the people filling the yard. Years earlier, greed had almost destroyed this family. Now, forgiveness had rebuilt it. The house was still standing. The maple tree was still growing. The porch light still shone every evening. But the greatest victory wasn't that I had kept my home. The greatest victory was that my family had finally learned why it mattered. Some people leave behind money. Others leave behind property. Daniel left behind values. And in the end, those values became the only inheritance that truly mattered.